So far we've gotten to talk about what it looks like to go through a creation to Christ story with someone who's a yellow light or someone who is interested but not totally convinced that they want to put their trust in God. So I'm just going to go over, we have two tools that we use for that type of situation. So you've gotten to meet someone at UCF or CVI or Fun Spot or in Charlotte, DR. And you got to share the gospel with them. And you ask them, hey, is this something that you want to receive right now? And their response is, I'm not sure. I don't know. And you encourage them like, hey, today is the day of salvation. That's what Jesus calls it. And they're not convinced that that's what they want to trust in because they know it's a big decision. And so one thing that I love getting to do is getting to explore the Bible with people who aren't convinced it's true yet. Because we get an opportunity to stand next to someone as their eyes get opened to the truth, right? I want to share a quick story of this guy, Chris, that I met several weeks ago at FSU. I met him, he was in front of the library. Ended up getting to talk with him for a while that day. Shared the gospel with him, and at the end of our time, he's like, yeah, I grew up in church a few years ago, decided that wasn't for me. It's not something I want. And so we got to talk a little bit more. Some things happened in his family that kind of drove him away from God. And he was convinced that God was evil, and that there were a lot of contradictions in his book. And so he's like, why in the world would I trust a God that's evil and someone who can't have an accurate book like the Bible? And so you might be thinking, well, one, I know God's good, and two, I know the Bible doesn't have contradictions. But in his mind, those were the two things that he was stuck on. And so I asked him, I was like, hey, Chris, I would love to explore the Bible with you because I think it's worth figuring out if God is worth trusting. Because if he's worth trusting, then he's worth giving our life to. But if he's not worth trusting, if he is evil, if his book is full of contradictions, then he's not worth trusting. So would you be up for meeting with me, maybe tomorrow or the next day? And what I'm imagining that would look like is we'd get together, we could talk for a little bit, but then there's a few passages that would be really cool to get to go through. And we can ask, like, what do we learn about God here? And then how does this then apply to us? And so Chris was like, sure, that sounds good. Let's do that. So he went into it knowing that it was kind of an exploratory thing. He wanted to figure out if God was worth trusting. One thing, so I met with him the last week before coming here, and it was cool. He did not put his trust in Christ then, but we were talking, and I wrote down what his answer to what he thinks Christianity is now, because I thought he is really catching it. And if he doesn't become a Christian this summer, I'm very sure he'll become a Christian this fall if God calls him. Because he said, so you're telling me the objective of Christianity isn't to do good, but to return to God? And that doing good is a byproduct of a relationship with God? And so before we got to study the stories of hope, which is what we went through, his view of Christianity was, I've just got to do good. That's what it means to be a Christian. But now he understands that Christianity isn't about doing good. It's about being restored to God. And then a byproduct of that is doing good. And so the tool that we get to use for people like Chris, who they're not quite sure whether they want to trust God, is Stories of Hope, which we have in your packet, in your manual. Move closer to the front of the packet. It's Stories of Hope, Creation to Christ. We've got 8 stories in here that are stories from the Gospels. They're stories that really show who Jesus is and how he wants us to respond to him. And so these are stories that each of us are going to use, I hope, a lot this summer. We're going to get to explore God with people who aren't quite sure if Jesus is worth trusting. And these stories will help us pick out different aspects of who Jesus is and what he's calling us to do. So these stories, they're in the Gospels, and they are really beneficial for someone like Chris, who maybe has a Christian or church background, but he's not convinced that God is worth following. So he has an idea of what the Bible's about. He has an idea of who Jesus is. It's not the first time he's heard of the Bible or God or Jesus, but he's still learning. He's still in that learning process. So these are going to be huge resources for us this summer. And I hope that each of us will get to use this multiple times. And I will say they're not necessarily in an order. Like, you're welcome to use different stories depending on the discernment you have with the Spirit, because I think that some of them have been really helpful and really good depending on conversations that I've had with Chris, or gotten to go through this with several guys back at FSU. So getting to go through these is really helpful. But the story that Tommy got to go through just now was a Creation to Christ story, which we actually have a paper that we're going to hand out. There is some information about the Creation to Christ story on the back of the Story of Hope page, but this one's more detailed because it goes through the passages of what the theme of the Bible is. It kind of picks out 9 stories in the Bible to be able to summarize the whole Bible. And so this would be something that we would use for someone who maybe they don't have much of a religious background. They didn't grow up in church, didn't have an idea much of who Jesus is. They're not sure why he came. So these stories are huge. Like, Tommy did an excellent job of getting to summarize that story and then helping us walk through it. And both of these, we would use the sword method, like what was written up here. What do we learn about God, about ourselves, and sin, promises, examples, commands? And so those are kind of 2 resources that we'll get to use as we're meeting people, sharing the gospel, and they're not quite convinced that they want to trust in God, but we'll now get to explore different passages with them. So what we're going to do is, in your home group or in your table, the third youngest person is going to determine which story they'd like to go through, one that they haven't gone through very much. So it could be a Creation to Christ story, or it could be a Story of Hope story. The reason we want to go through it is because when we go through it with someone else, we want to have an idea of what we're doing, right? We want to be proficient. We want to speak effectively. And so third youngest person is going to determine what story to go through. You're just going to do the middle third, so just the lesson portion. Third youngest person is going to lead that time. So it's going to be as if they're leading among a group of yellow lights. And then at the end, we're going to get to give some critical feedback. So there's kind of 4 questions at the end, and I'll go over these again. But 4 questions that we'll do for feedback. The first one is we'll have the leader say, hey, this is something that I feel like I did well. Right? Kind of, yeah, I think that this part of the lesson went really well. And then they'll say, this is something that I wish I could do better. This is something that I want to improve in. And then the next one would be opening up for the group to give some feedback. So, hey, this is what you did really well. I feel like you did a really good job of listening to us. I feel like you did a really good job of making it very natural for us to get to study this together. And then the last one is, hey, this is something that I think you can improve on. Whether it could be like a social, like, hey, make eye contact with me when we're talking. Or it could be try not to fidget with your pen. Or slow down when you get to this part. Or let's make sure we get to the main point of the passage. Does that make sense? Anyone have any questions? All right, so third youngest person, you're going to determine which story, whether it's a story of hope, creation to Christ. You're going to have about 20 minutes to go through the lesson portion. And then at the end, go ahead and start with the feedback. And then I'll get back up here. So go for it. All right. So just to, I want to hear some of the feedback that you guys gave. So who wants to kind of share something that their leader did well?
Yo, Nancy did a really good job of like taking what she do. Like, so she really got the story of the sense of woman down pat, and she went right to her go-to, and you can tell she had some familiarity with what she was talking about.
That's cool. Cool. Anyway.
Jay didn't talk. Let us talk a little bit.
Nice. JD?
They did a really good job of having like long, awkward pauses to give us opportunities to realize like, oh, we need to fill up this awkward pause with something.
It's only awkward if you make it awkward.
Yeah.
Good pause.
Yeah, good.
Eddie, he let us shape our piece. He let everybody say what they thought. Each part of the SOAR method they thought was there, and he also gave a couple of questions where he made us, get more into discussion.
Yeah, Eddie?
Yeah, nice. Who else has got? Go for it, Missy.
Anthony did a really good job of communicating and engaging with us, but also he answered our questions really well, because we asked him questions about the passage too. He did a really good job of that.
Cool. Nice. So, guys, we want to make this a common practice that we are encouraging and building up people who are leading, people who are facilitating, stepping out of their comfort zone. Because we want to be encouraging, right? We want to be exhorting those who are helping by serving us. And now, the leaders at each table, what is something that was pointed out to you or you noticed that you could improve on? Go for it, Anthony.
Smile more.
Yeah. Yeah, good. Show that you're comfortable being there.
Having more of my own input.
Okay. Yeah.
This group is topical.
Good. Go for it, Ben.
Yeah, I also could like input more from it.
Yeah. So maybe have an idea of what you're going over, so that way you thought through it a little bit. Yeah. Good, Brooke.
Work on figuring out timing to make it not too awkward, but also long enough.
Okay.
Be able to respond.
Yeah. Learn those social cues of what makes sense, and it's different for everyone, so it's constant. Good. What else, Scott? Something. Holly?
To make sure that everyone's involved in
Okay. Yeah. Make sure not anyone is left out. It's really good. So, Jake?
I guess like during the conversation back on the topic, if that's been straight, we don't talk about
Yeah. That's good. Not go down rabbit trails. That's one of the roles of someone who's guiding time. Good. Go for it.
Just let them know when it's wrong and move on to the conversation.
Yeah. Learn that flow and how much time you have. That's huge. So we want to make this a common practice too, that not only are we encouraging, but we're also helping each other get better. Because we want to not just stay where we're at, we want to constantly be getting better. And so I am going to, here in Orlando, we're going to be encouraging each person to be giving constructive feedback after each time we go sharing, after each time we have home group, even during accountability time. So we want to be people that encourage and that help us get better. So hope you guys caught that.
Justin, I had a question about group or yellow light group situations. Can I ask? either you or Tom or I find a lot of times we'll meet one person who's a yellow light. What do you think about numbers? Should I bring someone with me, or should I have 3 people with me, or sometimes it's awkward. And then how does that other person who is a believer answer questions, participate but not like give all the answers? Have you anyone want to speak to that group dynamic sometimes and how that looks and what's wise and what's not?
Alright,
So a lot of times it's one person you're meeting with, not a group. If it's group, it's great. But, I mean, that question makes sense?
Yeah, I mean, I'd encourage the person, one of the things we looked at is who can you bring with you, so for them to feel comfortable bringing people, Mark mentioned that, but also, I think one of the things in the manual says like the 30%, 70%, which is really hard to do when they're not just, they're not just creating conversation, but we actually went through that today with the follow-up that we have is you don't want to obviously outnumber them, intimidate them with a bunch of new people. There's nothing wrong with bringing somebody else, with you that, like here, the project, people are leaving. Bring somebody with you that's going to stay here, with the people that you've met, because they're the ones that's going to be working with them while you're leaving. So, I don't know.
And I think that second person, so someone's probably leading that time. Second person, not to be afraid to answer some questions. Like, be a participant, not just a watcher. But don't answer all the questions. I think it's more one of the things I'm noticing. Because sometimes that other second person will come and they don't know their role. So it's a good thing to even talk about beforehand, like, hey, how much do you want me to be involved or not? Or, it probably depends if you're modeling more or if they're assisting. But I just know it's kind of awkward. Like, you know all the answers. Do I want to answer them all? You don't want to answer them all. But you also don't want to just sit there and not say a word. So I think you'll learn how that goes. I just know that's an option for people.
Mark,
Joy brought up a question during the break, and I wonder whether it might be helpful. It's about yellow lights in particular. She just says, I'm not really sure what do I do with all these yellow lights. And I want to share with her is yellow lights is a range of type of people. You have your skeptics that are a yellow light because they want to convince you of what they believe. Okay? So that's kind of the orangey end of the yellow light, shall we say. Then the genuine yellow light is somebody who's just curious, but they have no idea. They're just curious. And then the brighter yellow light are those who have a lot of questions. They want to know, but they just need to be convinced. Does that make sense? And one of the key things with yellow lights is discerning as early as possible in your follow-up which of these 3 basic yellow lights they are. And you do that by just asking them, hey, we got back together here. What's really on your heart about this? You can just ask that very plainly. Or you can start sharing something, and the way they respond to you will give you a very clear indication of which of these 3 types of yellow lights they are. And then you want to go accordingly. If it's a skeptic, you really don't want to spend a ton of time with them. A lot of people want to get into apologetics with these orangey folks. You are wasting your time in most of the case. I'd say the only exception is if you really want to be equipped in this, Ravi Zacharias has a ton of YouTubes on how he responds to skeptics, and he's very gentle, but he's very forthright about challenging them. Very gentle, but very forthright. And that's really what you need to do. That's what Proverbs says. Answer a fool according to their folly. But don't get into a bunch of apologetic proofs because it's not going to help. Honestly, I've wasted many hours trying to convince. The curious, stories of hope, really all the things you guys have been trained in, stories of hope, going into the very basics, sharing the gospel, sharing your testimony. The curious, that's going to really help them. And then with those that are the brighter yellow, they got questions. They're the ones that you go into the apologetics with. Because they kind of have a foundation, and you continue that foundation, but those are who you can get into the apologetics with. So with that yellow light, just remember there's a range, and you want to adjust your time and your focus for them accordingly. Really critical.
Cool. Well, I'm going to invite Burke on up here. He's going to do some recap